Unilateral divorce in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So this no-fault divorce violates the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Why is that? Because the state is saying that in an issue where irretrievability is being asserted as the cause for divorce, that's a viewpoint. That's one person's viewpoint. So the state is establishing that viewpoint. My viewpoint says no, it's not irretrievable. The state says your viewpoint doesn't matter. The state is violating the Establishment Clause. It is establishing an ideology. And we actually have a case. Matthew Johnson, who was on this call, has been working on this quite a bit. And he's down here. He gave an interview last year about no-fault divorce, government-sponsored viewpoint discrimination. And it's not just viewpoint discrimination, it's even religious viewpoint discrimination. By the way, this case right now is at the Supreme Court printing press, and it will be presented to to see if the Supreme Court will hear it this upcoming session. So there are movements taking place and cases being filed against this unilateral divorce. It violates the Second Amendment. You can lose your right to have a gun if you have a divorce filed against you. Without the consent of the Third Amendment, you should not guarantee no soldier in time of peace shall be quarantined in any house without the consent of the owner. Well, when you're kicked out of your home, it doesn't make a difference if you're the owner or not. They just boot you out. No consent necessary. Fourth Amendment, you have the right to be secure in your persons, houses, papers, and effects, except upon probable cause. In divorce court, you have to produce all of these papers and statements and everything else, and there's no probable cause. Why do you have to do this? It violates the Fourth Amendment. By the way, others can do a much better job of this than I can. I just want to briefly touch these things to say unilateral divorce basically violates every single Bill of Rights that we have in the federal Constitution. The Fifth Amendment, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And that's exactly what they do. What have I done? Nothing. Well, that's okay. You still have to give up 50% of your assets right now. You have to have future income confiscated from you. You have all of these things that are coming upon you, and you have without due process of law, because it is a predetermined outcome. The Sixth Amendment, having the impartial jury and be informed of the nature of the cause of the accusation, have the assistance of counsel. How is a jury impartial when the outcome is predetermined? There's no possible way that you can have an impartial jury. And as far as the informed of the nature and the cause, what is the accusation? What is its nature? What is its cause? It's interesting because viewpoint, insupportability might just say, well, I'm not happy. So how is that my fault? I mean, what am I supposed to do? Maybe you're having a mental issue. Maybe you're having a medical issue. Maybe you just, because you've met somebody else, that's fine. If but that's not my issue when insupportability often is the person who's alleging the petition and the other person may have no action whatsoever that has done it. A right by jury shall be preserved and facts tried by a jury. No facts are necessary in divorce. And again, the absurdity of the Texas divorce laws. And this is done, it's on record for everybody to see. And what some people have said about the Soviet Union and their divorce courts and stuff like that, it's the buffoonery of what they see that is making people laugh. It's not just the injustice, it's how much buffoonery is being shown. And if you go to our courts in Texas, they are buffoonery. It is buffoonery. It's buffoonery on display. I couldn't believe this stuff. I started to attend some of these courts to see what takes place. I have videos of stuff. I've got audios. I've seen this stuff. And each case is more egregious than the first. And the stuff that people say is ridiculous. Now, the Eighth Amendment. What about cruel and unusual punishments? Here's something that you've probably not heard about. Penile plethysmography. And what it does is this. This was developed in Czechoslovakia because people didn't want to go to war. They were claiming they were homosexuals. So they developed this test, which was not very accurate, and they put it on a man's penis, and they showed him like erotic films and stuff like that to see how much arousal he would get. And that would determine whether he was homosexual or not. Now, this video right here, there is a person in Texas who had that happen to him. And they can do this with women. They can do it vaginally as well. And they show you pornography. They show you, kiddie porn. And they want to see, can they get an arousal out of you to determine whether you might possibly be a sex offender. Cruel, unusual punishment. What about when you deprive from seeing your children? I know of a guy right now who's going through this in Mineral Wells. And you know what? It's his wife who gets to keep filing and keep lawsuit after lawsuit against him. This is a penalty, a state jail felony in the state of Texas, and nobody's even touching it. And the judges often will use the threat of seeing your children to get you in line. How about losing your motor vehicle registration because you can't pay child support? Because after you've been bankrupted by these attorneys, now you're going to have to pay child support. You didn't even want the divorce, but the judge indiscriminately says, well, you need to pay her or you need to pay him so much money. From what? You can't do it. So the Attorney General can't actually put your picture up on their website. Child support evaders. Here, if you, maybe they ought to put them on milk cartons again, like one state did at one time. These are child support evaders, and they're asking for people, please help us find these people. If you know where they are, report them to us. You have both current and arrested child support evaders. The Ninth Amendment. The certain rights, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights. You have no rights in family court. You really don't. The power is not for the 10th Amendment. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution or prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And yet much of the divorce industry has been federalized. And that's why if you look at the Texas Family Code 201.107C, it says that the states are supposed to rule in such a manner as to maximize Title 4D payments, reimbursements. Title 4D is a federal program. So the federal government is now involved in divorce, and that's what our state does because we want the money. And you can talk about Title 4D. Texas has led the entire nation for about 12 years straight in child support collection, and they look at like all of these great things we're doing for the family. It's more like all of these horrendous things that you're doing to the family. And by the way, there is a judge, and this video of mine got taken down, but I did catch her, and she interacted with me on the video. Litigating protective orders, and she shows how to use protective orders to gain an advantage in divorce. You go to the 13th Amendment. How about neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. You can be forced to go to work to pay your child support because the government wants you to. That is involuntary servitude, in my opinion. Or the government confiscates money from your paycheck. You may make $1,000, and by the way, you get to see 200 of it because the government has to take all of your money. And if you don't pay it, your employer can be fined if they don't have certain holds upon it. The 14th Amendment, again, making the Fifth Amendment applicable to the states. We have two issues here. Due process. Again, there is no due process. Due process is that you can be meaningfully heard. You have an opportunity to win your case. But you don't have an opportunity. There is no due process. And yet, we're guaranteed due process. Equal protection under the law. There is no equal protection under the law in this situation. And that's what part of the reason that I believe the case in Nebraska is being argued right now in front of the Nebraska Supreme Court. Those hearings have been conducted. The court is looking at that right now. It violates the contract clause. I said that marriage to religious people is a covenant, but to regular people, it is a contract. It has every element of a contract. Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution, the contract clause, states that the states shall do nothing to impair the obligation of contracts. This, by the way, also is repeated in the Texas State Constitution. There was a court case, I believe it was Board of Dartmouth versus Woodward back in 1800s, 1820, something like that, that actually talked about this very same issue. The states are not allowed to impair the obligation of contracts. And yet with no-fault divorce, the state not only impairs the obligations of contracts, but incentivizes and rewards the impairment of contracts. There is the issue of the separation of powers and the non-delegation doctrines. Judges are not acting judicially when you go to a divorce court. They are acting in a ministerial capacity. There is no judicial discretion being exercised. One judge told me, Judge Brett Hall, there is nothing I could do. I had to do it. I had to. The law told me I had to. Well, number one, it did not say that. It said he may, and there were other things that he should have done. But by doing so, he's just saying, if I have to do it, why do I need a judge at all? There is no reason. In fact, if you go to these family courts, what they will do is they'll take the divorces first because they can knock them out in a hurry. And then they have the more complicated stuff. This has become a machinery. This has become, again, the divorce mill. But it also is saying that if the judges are not acting in a judicial manner, if they're acting as a member of the executive by enforcing the law, which is basically what he said, They are violating the separation of powers doctrine, and they also are liable. They are not protected by judicial immunity because they're not acting as a judge. So they should be sued. The Texas Bill of Rights, very quickly. I've only got 10 more slides here. This will be fast. Freedom of worship. We have actually more religious protection in the state of Texas than what the federal Constitution guarantees us. No human authority ought, in any case whatever, to control or interfere with the rights of conscience and matters of religion. So, if divorce is contrary to my right of conscience in my religion, you're not supposed to interfere with that. But the state always does, and the state always sides with the other person. Two religious people get married, the state will side with the backslider. Thompson Frost in Waite versus Waite, and the case text is right here, actually agreed that the issue of the religious issue was a concern and should be considered to be unconstitutional. What the action was that was taken against this man, Waite. Freedom of speech and of the press, Article 1, Section 8. Every person shall be at liberty to speak, write, or publish his opinions on any subject. Go to a court and watch them give you gag orders. They pass them out like candy. Now, the interesting thing is that the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, wrote that gag orders are unconstitutional prima facie, but the reality is the courts always use them. Jeff Younger's case, Save James. What do? They put a gag order on. That's what they do. They put gag orders all over the place. Gag orders are unconstitutional, but so is unilateral no-fault divorce. So why does it surprise anybody that unconstitutional gag orders are used to hide what their actions are? They say that they're doing it to protect the privacy of people. They are not. They are doing it to cover up their evil doings and unconstitutional activities. Searches and seizures, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Denial of bail for violation of protective order involving family violence. The family violence issue, the domestic violence industry, I'll call it, all you have to do is have an accusation. There's no proof necessary. You're considered guilty. You have to prove your innocence. And you know, the way that these restraining orders work, these temporary orders, these protective orders, is horrendous. But again, you know, it very much suits the purpose of the divorce industry and of the state right now. Habeas corpus, the writ of habeas corpus is a writ of right, shall never be suspended. It can require is a writ requiring a person under arrest to be brought before a judge into court. They can keep people locked up for months without this being done. It violates, for some people, it violates habeas corpus, which again is in our Article 1, Section 10, 12 of our Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights are in our Texas Constitution, Article 1. There's 32 different sections there. The Bill of Attainder, the ex post facto and retroactive laws, impairing of obligation and contracts. I talked about the obligation of contracts. Bill of Attainder is an act of the legislature declaring a person or groups of persons guilty of some crime and punishing them, often without a trial. So I say, what was my crime? What did I do? Well, it's this time. There's no crime committed, and yet you are declared guilty, and you will lose property. Now, if a person wants to file for no-fault divorce, unilateral no-fault divorce, and leave, you might say, okay, you know what? You might be gracious enough to say that person can leave. But you don't leave the marital estate and plunder the marital assets and leave the door wide open for attorneys and everybody else to get involved. Ex post facto law is another issue here. The taking of property for public use. It depends on how you look at this. I just say that when they take your property from you for no reason, or the threat of a punishment. I have a friend who was in court, and they were threatening to fine him unless he signed over his house to be sold to pay the attorney fees of his wife, and they also deleted that from the court record. And that is not unusual for transcripts to be altered, which is why I think we need to have video cameras and recordings in the courts. Imprisonment for debt. No person shall ever be in prison for debt. And yet this is something the Attorney General uses to imprison people for debt because you cannot pay your child support. The interesting thing is this is they're really playing both ends at this point in time, because they say that child support is for the child, and yet the reality is the debt is to the state. So you can't be put in prison for debt, but they routinely sentence people to prison. I had a friend who was in there for 6 months because either he couldn't or wouldn't pay the child support, the extortion fee, And child support is determined because if we get child support, we get matching funds from Title 4D. And the Title 4D courts also, I've not been to one of those yet. I plan to be there, but from the things that I've heard, they are also horrendous. Deprivation of life, liberty, or property by due course of law. All of this stuff happens routinely. Once again, I mean, you're deprived of life, liberty, property, of your children. You can be kicked out of your home. You can be given, okay, the police have knocked on your door, you've got 2 or 3 hours to get out of here. Standard possession order somehow is in the best interest of the child. That makes you a visitor in your child's life. All of these things take place routinely with unilateral no-fault divorce. Again, the right to keep and bear arms. So the right of crime victims, I thought this was interesting because a crime victim has the following rights: to be treated with fairness and respect for the victim's dignity and privacy. Crime victims have rights. Defendants in divorce who are abused by the courts and by the attorneys do not get the same treatment and respect and dignity that criminals get. There is funds for compensation to victims of crime, and yet what happens in divorce court, these people who are being victimized have to come up with money, and the attorneys will tell you, well, do you have more money? Do you have a credit card? Can you take a line of credit out on your house? Can you borrow some money from your family? And what will often happen, and I've heard this repeatedly, you go into court and they say, well, you need to catch up on your bill first, and if you can't do it because you're tapped out, all of the stuff that they've done, they will not represent you in court. A lot of these people, in my opinion, are victims of crime, of the criminal, and I'll call it the criminal divorce cartel, the criminal divorce industry in the state of Texas. And I think they should be compensated. So especially important, I think, is Article 3, Section 56, prohibited local and special laws. The legislature shall not, this is in our Texas state constitution, they are forbidden from passing any local or special law authorizing granting divorce. Unilateral divorce is a special law that elevates the will or the desire of the petitioner to the level and force of law itself. It is my own special law. I've showed this to attorneys and the judges, and they're shocked. They did not even realize this is in there. Nobody has yet refuted that this is in there and that by itself it should eliminate no-fault divorce in the state of Texas. So, in my opinion, the state has abrogated its duties to defend marriage. They are engaging in fraud. They have betrayed its citizens because they've told the people that this is a great institution, marriage. We want you to get marriage, and yet it has no legal protection whatsoever. Once again, in essence, all we have is a voluntary cohabitation, and there's nothing that binds you to another person. But make sure you register with the state. They want to know about that. Stephen Baskerville says unilateral divorce expands the power of government. The destructive power of divorce is well known in many ways. It is by far the greatest threat to the integrity and the survival of the family to this day. It expands the power of government. It is the principal cause of the domestic state machinery. And what it does, it has it's a radical innovation in the legal system and the principles of legal justice. It rationalizes and permits unprecedented state intrusion into the private sphere of life and the violation of basic constitutional rights. It is the main incubator of social pathologies. Divorce causes every single pathology that we know of to get worse. If it's not the cause of it, it makes it worse, statistically speaking. And it is the main source of almost all other political and legal innovations. And that says social revolution, that should be sexual. And again, I have a link for his video. Last 2 slides, Ronald Reagan said it was the biggest mistake. Signing no-fault divorce was the biggest mistake he made in public office. Dr. Albert Mohler of the Southern Baptist says divorce is the scandal of the evangelical conscience. Karl Marx says, abolition of the family. And that's exactly what's taking place with unilateral divorce. Again, Dr. Stephen Baskerville, the most direct threat to the family is divorce on demand. Governor Mike Huckabee, I spoke with him personally. He said this. He said, Jeff, no-fault divorce is the worst thing that ever happened to America. For some of us, for most of us, we may be survivors of what's going on here, but we are fighting for our children and our grandchildren. The last thing we want to leave to them is this wretchedly horrible and hideously evil system. And, so people ask me, why are you fighting against this? I do not want my grandchildren. By the way, I haven't seen my grandchildren for 5 years now. And this happens because of this unilateral divorce crap. I was so close to them, spent so much time with them, but I think that maybe someday they're going to come up to me, and I hope to God that they don't say, Grandpa, do you know what they do to us in these courts? And if I would say, yes, but Grandpa, did you try to fix it? No, Cruz, no, Gideon, I didn't. My intent is to get this, purge this evil from our system, and to expose it. And I believe that some of these people are just absolute criminals. So I'm sorry that maybe I went a little bit off track here. Anyway, that is it. Thank you so much for your time. I apologize for going over time. First time I've done this, I tried to put it together real quickly, so there's been a few things that I would change right now looking at the presentation, but thank you so much. Any questions?
Wow, Jeff, thank you so much. And I know that this is deeply personal, and I know that you are motivated by truth and you are excited by truth. And that's why I wanted to bring you here. I mean, this is something that I had not thought deeply about until probably I met you. And I think Bobby introduced us. And it's just been really enlightening to hear you speak to the state, to the Republican Party in the state of Texas, and then to hear this full presentation. I wondered if anybody has any questions. I was trying to track a little bit of it in here.